I would like first to welcome all of you to our 18th summer session. In the Hebrew language, letters have numerical value, and the number 18 translates to the word chai, which means alive or life. So here we are, very much alive and hoping to continue to help. In the next 2 weeks, I will be covering a great deal of material. Those of you who have been here before know how much it is. And that you notice that the part of your body that will work the hardest and tire the most will not be your hands and your arms, but rather your brains. As you hear the lectures and you work individually with the teacher assigned to you, you will begin to understand how the theoretical and the practical work together, the practical being the application of this information. Many years ago, when Dorothy Taubman was teaching young students, she noticed that certain technical solutions worked consistently and that mediocre techniques suddenly blossomed. It was this fact, among others, that inspired and encouraged her to embark upon this grueling and complicated investigation. She never dreamed, I don't think, that the result would be what it turned out to be, that it would yield so much information. So those of us who have benefited from this body of knowledge and have been mesmerized by it, I should say, are eternally grateful to her. And I would like to read from her own introduction to her work and then go on. This is what she has to say, that all too often, when students fail to develop virtuosity, it is assumed that it is a lack of talent rather than a lack of knowledge. When students complain of pain, they are told it is good for them, that it is necessary for the development of muscles. No pain, no gain has been a false and dangerous motto, and we should say that no pain is your gain. My work and subsequent events have shown that pain is always a warning sign that something is wrong, as anywhere else in the body. Acceptance of pain and fatigue as a necessary adjunct of playing an instrument has resulted in a large number of injured among us. The most recent figure is 76% of orchestral players, and according to doctor surveys, it is higher among pianists. Perhaps the difference in the relationship of the piano teacher and student from those in other fields may have some bearing on the problems that are surfacing at this time. Whereas open debate is encouraged in other fields, piano students, and I should say other instrumentalists as well, it's really all the same, rarely question the instructions given them. Rather than have students follow blindly, instructions should be given with explanations that stand up to scientific challenge. We should be able to ask why, like children. It is important that students participate intellectually in the process of their physical development. This will encourage an awareness of what works for them and damage can possibly be avoided. It is essential that we avail ourselves of some scientific procedures. There are two important aspects of coordinate playing. One, that the fingers, hands, and arms each do what they can do best without strain. Two, that the fingers, hands, and arms must work together as a unit. The study of piano technique is a study of motion. What I'll be talking for the next 2 weeks has to do with how to move, not how to develop muscles. The complexities and subtleties of the movements involved are such that it is understandable why they have defied detection. Some are minuscule and some not even visible, but once revealed, they are a magical world of motion. Otto Ortmann, in his book, The Physiological Mechanics of Piano Technique, states, and I quote, "What frequently appears as a motionless state is in reality a minute movement, too small or too rapid to be readily detected by the eye." That's the end of the quote. What also complicates matters is that when all the basic movements are put together, they assume another shape. The main problem has been that most of the traditional training has been based on visible motions without realizing that the high visibility of the finger activity was but the tip of the iceberg, and that what they were seeing was the result, and I repeat, result, of complex combinations of almost entirely invisible arm and hand actions. We've always analyzed what we saw, not realizing what was underneath it, what was behind. In other words, what we see mostly are the fingers moving up and down and sideways across the keyboard. Rarely are we aware of the arm's major role in facilitating the finger work and movement across the keyboard. And that will be the first thing I'll talk about tomorrow, how to facilitate the fingers' movements without causing problems and tensions. Most pianists arriving at my studio had not tuned into their arms at all until they developed pain there. All the emphasis was on the fingers. Most of the training has been to strengthen the finger muscles to do the entire job for power, for speed, for stretching across distances. It is clearly expressed in Czerny's exercises recommending active fingers and quiet arm. Exercises for creating powerful fingers and stretching the fingers are responsible for much of the injuries, especially the finger individualization exercise, which I will discuss later. I want to say something about exercises. I have really many chapters on all the current practices that are used in terms of treating pianist ailments and also developing a technique such as relaxation and tension and key bedding and key releases and the so-called weak fourth finger and endurance and so on and so forth, stretching. I will see how much time I have in the next 2 weeks, and I will probably insert those things to just explain to you what is wrong with those practices. Because if you try to add what you learn here to all these practices, if you're doing them, you'll end up with a greater confusion than the one that you came with. So, I want you to understand why something is wrong. So it's not just because we say it's wrong, but it's based on certain facts outside of the fact that it doesn't feel good. And that should be the first reason to think that something is wrong, because it doesn't feel good. And when it feels good, it's right. When it's right, it feels good. Now, I wanted to say something about exercises in general. And it was James who said on instrumental study, and I quote, "But singling out basic forms is not solving the technical problems connected with them. Not one of the etude writers says a word about the dear deadly question of how the thing is done." End of quote. In other words, just by isolating and making an exercise out of something still doesn't give you a way to do it. The hope is that somehow it will force it into the hand. Now, you know one thing, that when you have to practice hours and hours and hours a day, and you still don't know whether it will come out or not, you know that it is not a skill. You know that it's something that has been forced into the technique, because a skill means that it's there always. You can always count on it. It's the same as talking and walking. Even if you're not at the instrument for a month or 2 months or 6 months, you're not going to forget it. It's there. So that when you're told, for example, if one cannot do arpeggios, and let's say they go to and they do an etude based on arpeggios, it could be even in some cases that the etude will feel very good, and when they go back to the piece, it will fall apart. And the reason for that shows a basic lack of diagnostic approach. Sometimes nothing is wrong with the passage, with the arpeggio. And if someone, for example, in our kind of thinking, if someone comes and says, "I have a problem with this arpeggio," the first thing I will say, play that arpeggio. And if they play it and they say it feels great, then I know that it's something that is either before it or something that is after that is creating it. Because you could have an octave or a leap or a trill, something leading to the arpeggio which isn't feeling good, so by the time you get to the arpeggio doesn't feel good. Or it could be an anticipation of something that comes right after it that doesn't feel good. So you have to, you see, you can be working on something that is perfectly fine when the reason lies somewhere else.
Edna was discussing the problem of the fact that there may be nothing wrong with the arpeggio, and indeed very often students will come in and they'll fail in an arpeggio, and yet when I'll ask them to play it separately, they play it very well. Well, that tells me that there's nothing wrong with the arpeggio, but there had to be something wrong with the way they got into the arpeggio. That has to do with what they were doing before. Suppose they were playing a series of chords, and the chords brought them into a specific position. Now, that position where they ended on the last chord could be a very bad position to start the arpeggio. So what they have to do is, if they can do the arpeggio well by itself, do the arpeggio, study and see where the arm is, go back to the section right before it, and make sure that when they go from that section to the arpeggio, that they have moved the arm into the correct arpeggio position. If there is something wrong with the arpeggio itself, certainly practicing it over and over in the exercise is not going to make it any better. They're only working the wrong habits in deeper and deeper. And what happens, they wonder why they can do it after they do it 100 times in an etude. Sure, if you do it over and over, you can train your fingers to do it even the wrong way. But when you have to play it in a piece, you don't really have the knowledge because you're doing it incorrectly. And you suddenly have to do it once and muster up that arpeggio immediately, it will fail because you didn't know how to do it to begin with. You had to force it. You could do it after 100 times, but you couldn't do it after just doing it once.
So if something is wrong with arpeggio, the question is, well, what is wrong with it? Is it the basic way that we move from finger to finger that is not comfortable? Is it the feeling of stretchiness? Is it the way we move to the thumb? Is it the way we move back from the thumb? In other words, where is the problem? Because the problem has to be resolved right there. We have to see what is wrong with that passage. And that's why there's a tremendous amount of waste of time that goes with doing exercises. Most of them, the Czerny exercises and those etudes cannot do harm when you're just told to do them. But they're not going to solve the problem. There are certain exercises that are very dangerous, and I'll discuss one of them in a minute. I think also that doing exercise and repeating things is what turns kids off, from playing. You don't give them a reason, just so you have to repeat it again and again and again. It's a tremendous loss of time and concentration. And some people also suggest read a book while you're doing it, so you improve your mind. In other words, just to let the hands, because it's based again on just developing the muscles. Why think then? The use of exercise has become a way out rather than a solution. It has lulled the student and teacher into thinking that more hours of practice, a good part of which should be devoted to exercises, will solve all problems. Too many of us have done this only to find out that at the end of many years of such work, the problems were still around. And that's when we think that we're not talented, that we were not born with what it takes to do these things correctly. Now, one exercise that I would like to mention in particular is that of the finger individualization exercise. And this is, I would say, one of the main causes for tendinitis, for tension, for pain. If you leave this place after 2 weeks and you don't do it, if you did it before, you'll be ahead of the game. So if you add what I'm going to show in the next 2 weeks and still do that, then you might as well not do what I'm going to talk about, because it's not going to work. Now, what is so bad, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about finger individualization. All of you, I'm sure most of you have done it. You put all the fingers down and then you lift one at a time. And usually you try to do it as high up as possible and as fast as possible. Of course, you have the weight of the arm is resting on the fingers that are not being used, and then there is a finger pulling up against this force that is pulling you down. And with that kind of antagonistic pulse, again, you can't have, especially when you go to the extreme range of motion, you have two muscles pulling at each other. There's no way you're going to be able to go fast when you have that. Now, some people, I'm sure, will say, well, I don't do it that high, so it couldn't hurt me. But if you try to do it with the fourth finger, if you lift even very little, will go immediately to the extreme range of motion. So whereas you're trying to equalize the fingers, you're really creating sensations of inequality. between the fingers, because when the fourth finger goes up a little bit, it's already the extreme range of motion because it has those bends. And that's why it's always been thought that the fourth finger is inherently a weak finger. But if you take now the same thing, if you stand on your second finger, try to do it with me. And instead of just let the arm be on one finger and lift your 3, 4, and 5, you always lift the fingers together, we never isolate them. Don't lift them high. And then drop on the third finger. You'll feel that the arm is going to come down behind that finger because it has nowhere else to go. And it's the support of the forearm behind each finger that is going to give it a feeling of equality. And when you do the same, you go from the second, you go to the fourth finger. The arm is going to be behind. There is no limitation in the flexion ability of the fourth finger, only in the lifting. But the piano is not up. The piano is down below. Thank God. So all we have to do is really just drop down, lift together, and drop down together to the piano, and that fourth finger is going to feel the same. Of course, you may go and try doing it, and you may still be isolated underneath, so that you need someone to show you the pedagogical ways. I'm explaining to you the theory, but the pedagogical ways of how to do these things. And understanding them here doesn't always mean that you can go and do them. Since the fingers and arms are attached to each other, if the arm is free and unrestrained, it naturally reacts with corresponding motions to the direction of the motion of the fingers. It is usually tiny enough to just be an imperceptible shimmer. Therefore, in order to have active fingers and a quiet arm a la Czerny, there would have to be a restriction on the arm's motions. Can you imagine the effect on the finger's freedom of action with a rigid arm dragging behind it? Also, the arm must move along across the keyboard with the fingers because it is attached to them. In fixating the arm while trying to move the fingers quickly, it could be compared to 5 racing horses pulling along a train without an engine. Now, the fact of the matter is that these problems have been around for a long time. They often have been called epidemics, but we know that epidemics come and go, whereas these problems have stayed. It is also not the so-called occupational disease of the 90s, as some people have called it, similar to the asbestos crisis of the 1980s. It was first described by an Italian doctor by the name of Bernard Ramazzini in 1717. He was the first person to describe cumulative microtrauma as the main cause of occupational disease, almost 300 years ago. In the 19th century, it was a standard part of medical practice. It affected most frequently writers and musicians, though many other hand-use intensive occupations were affected also. And in the 19th century, they called them cramps, a musician's cramp, a writer's cramp, and so on. Dr. Hunter Fry, an Australian plastic surgeon, writes in the Medical Journal of Australia in December 1/15, 1986, in volume 145, and I quote, "The clinical descriptions were so clear and so detailed that it could not be mistaken for any other condition." That's the end of the quote. And the New York Times Science section for March 3rd, 1992 says, "Repetitive motion disorders received only a flicker of expert attention until they began striking white-collar workers and especially newspaper reporters, who had been all but immune to the job-related injuries that other laborers have endured for centuries. Some of the rise in cases is widely attributed to increased recognition of the problem and a new willingness to report it." Dr. Laura Panett, an ergonomist and epidemiologist at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, said, "Historically, there's been lots of underreporting of these disorders. As she explained, Many workers did not recognize the problem as being job-related. Others who did worried about losing their jobs if they reported their injuries. That's the end of the quote. And we know that that continues to this day in the workroom, in other jobs amongst orchestral musicians, people on faculties at universities, that it's kept as a secret until they can no longer play or move their hands, whatever their job is. The universality of repetitive motion injuries is beginning to emerge as we read about problems plaguing computer operators, journalists, assembly line workers, postal workers, bank tellers, meat factory workers, carpenters, electricians, dog groomers, sign language interpreters, housewives, gardeners, and the list goes on and on. I will show and explain to you in the next 2 weeks how certain movements can disable musicians as well as people who work in other fields and how to avoid them. Overuse has nothing to do with it, but rather misuse. Often we say overusing our muscles. If you are misusing, though, your body and at the same time overusing it, chances are that you'll end up a statistic. Now we'll go straight to some facts and principles that we need to know in order to begin to evaluate a technique. What we have to know about muscles is not very much, even though I always like to say that there's a great deal of complicated muscular activity that goes on when we move clearly, and we're not aware of it until we have problems. When people say, well, I could move before, why can't I move suddenly? When you do it intuitively and it works, it's wonderful. But when you can no longer do it, then you have to know what the problem is and how to cure it. We need to know about the flexors and the muscles that move the fingers downward. And we need to know about the extensors. Those are the muscles that lift our fingers. And we need to know that both of them are situated in the forearm and that they pull in opposite directions. So clearly they can never be used at the same time, because if they are, what results are what we call dual muscular pulls, which is another name for tension. Anytime you move in a way that activates those two muscles at the same time, you'll end up with tension. We also have to know about the abductors and the adductors. They are muscles that open and close the fingers. And we need to know about the long flexor, which is a muscle that exerts its pull all the way to the tip of the finger, and it pulls tightly over the wrist. Anytime we curl our fingers, we activate that muscle, and I'll talk more about it in a few minutes. We also have to know how movement is produced, and that all movement is based on the leverage system. One example would be that of a drawbridge, where you have a fixed point from which the bridge is moving up and down. Another example would be that of the seesaw, where you have a wooden horse under a plank, and the plank is moving in both directions, so that we always have to have, again, a fixed point from which to move. In our bodies, it translates into fulcrums, into joints, that we have this joint for the fingers to move down from. We have the wrist for the hand actions. That's the stable point from which the wrist can move. We have the elbow for the hand and the forearm motions. And we have the shoulder for the whole arm movements. And you'll see the ramifications of understanding where the fulcrums have to be placed so that our different limb parts can move comfortably and in speed. We also need to know, and that's one of the most important principles in evaluating technique or movement in general, and that is that the physiologically best movement is one permitting motion in the mid-range of motion. It is easiest and smoothest near the middle range. increasing in difficulty as it approaches either extreme of the range. And this is something that Otto Ortmann wrote in 1927 in his book, The Physiological Mechanics of Piano Technique. And what he's saying is this. Let me go to the piano. That if your hand goes all the way up, you'll feel the tension very quickly, right here. If your hand goes, this is going to the extreme range of motion. If your hand goes all the way down, going to the extreme range of motion, you'll feel a pull here also. But if you want only halfway up and halfway down, mid-range, you'll see that it's very easy to move. Now that refers to stretching all the way. That refers to putting the fingers down and lifting the fingers, all the way up, including the fourth finger. It refers to twisting motions when we move the hand at the wrist joint to the extreme range of motion, right or left. Any motion that goes to extreme is in danger of creating an injury, whatever it is that you're doing. Now, a Taubman principle is, and it's repeating something I said before, is that the fingers, hands, and arms must work together as a unit. If the finger movements are not synchronized, very important word, synchronized with the hands and arms, what is to prevent the forearm from being tilted to the left when the fingers move to the right or the other way around, producing a drag on the fingers' actions and impeding motion? There are myriad ways such incoordination can occur. Therefore, the fingers, hands, and arms must be positioned to allow them to work as a unit. And the first thing that I like to show is how high should we be sitting, because if we're sitting too high or too low, you'll see that it's not possible to keep the fingers, hand, and arm unified. So right there, this is where we start. That in order to keep them as a unit, the elbow has to be level with the keyboard, with the top part of the keyboard, right there. This is one thing that allows for this unity to take place. The other thing that is very important, once we unified, people often still hold themselves up. They hover. And in order to create the correct balance at the keyboard, one should feel that they're resting down, without the keys going down, resting down. And for that to happen, there has to be a sense of contact between the fingertip and the key, quote, holding lightly, because if you hold, you grab on and you hold heavily, the keys will already fall down and there is too much weight. So when we talk about weight, we talk about the correct amount of weight that will allow us to feel that we are resting down without holding up. The holding up is not always something that is visible. A lot of the things that we do wrong are not visible. I can sit down and rest down, and I can sit down and I'm feeling inside that I'm holding up. Now what happens when the fingers don't hold on, there is no sense of contact with the key, the arm, the upper arm will take over and hold us on the keyboard so we don't fall off. If nothing is holding us there, we'll fall off. So there has to be another part of the body kicks in to hold us there. This is the whole story of technique, that when a right part doesn't work, the wrong part will come in, and that part was not meant to do the job, and usually it ends up as sensations of fatigue and pain. So that the moment the fingers don't hold on lightly to the keys, the upper arm will take over to hold us, and this is when you feel fatigue in the upper arm. Symptoms of fatigue in the upper arm have to do with holding up. Now the resting down, when we rest down and the weight is equally distributed between the fingers, hand, and forearm, and the keys are weighted, they have weights. The combination of the resting and the keys holding us so-called up will give us the perfect sensation of resting down without falling. As you see, when I'm resting down like this, you don't see a relaxation. I'm not talking about relaxation. I'm only talking in the proper resting in the proper amount, so there is no feeling of hovering. There's a feeling of resting down, and that takes very little. I feel the heaviness of the keys. There is a sense of contact between the fingertip and the key, which is the only contact that we have with the keyboard. So if there's no sensitivity and sense of contact there, it's not anywhere else. And this is what unifies all the parts together when we do that. The sitting properly and the feeling of resting down. There are many possibilities with things when they go wrong. You can do it wrong many ways, and you'll find that there's usually one way that something will feel right. If we sit, I'll discuss just some of those possibilities. If I'm sitting very high, and by the way, I have to say something about, people often think that the height of the chair has to be with the size of the person, but it doesn't have to do with the size of the person. It has to do with the length of the upper arm. If the upper arm is short, clearly you have to bring yourself to a level where, again, the elbow will be on the same level as the keys. If you have a very long upper arm that extends all the way down, the chair will have to come up. Whatever it is, you have to end up with an elbow that extends like on a straight plane this way. Now, if I'm sitting up, immediately, if we're talking about unifying all the parts and feeling that we can rest down and give the fingers the support of the hand and the forearm, when we sit up, everything is held up. Again, the upper arm is holding up, everything is holding up, and there is no support behind the fingers. That makes it very difficult to play. So very often, people, what they do, they'll bring some hand support behind the fingers, and when you do that, you already have a break in the wrist. There's a break in the unit. It doesn't have to be much. It's enough to break even a little bit. The moment it doesn't feel unified, it's a break, even if it's a very small break. So when you bring this down, it breaks the unity. Also, the weight of the arm falls into the wrist, and that's one of the main reasons for wrist pain and carpal tunnel syndrome, the low wrist. Also, the feeling is that you're falling off the keyboard, so the fingers begin to clench and to grab and to hang on to the keys, and that creates tightness.
The wrist is low, which means that the weight of the arm is falling into the wrist and not getting over to the fingers. And the arm has to do a lot of work to keep that hand from really falling off the piano. In other words, automatically, when the wrist is low and the weight falls here, if you just relax the least little bit, the hand is going to fall off the keyboard. So it's extremely important that we level off the wrist. Let me see if I can get her to begin to do that a little bit. Can you imitate me? I want you to watch. I want you to make believe that the hand and the arm is like a road going onto a bridge. Now, if you have a car riding here and this falls down, what's going to happen to the car? Psh, right off the bridge, right? I want you to pretend that the road has to be perfectly straight here. Let me see you put your hand here. We don't want the car to fall off. Mustn't fall off here, right? Can you try to play like that a little bit in both hands? Let's see if you can try. I bet you can. Let me see you do that. See? The attempt is there. Go ahead. Go ahead. Remember, we don't want the car to fall down. Yes. Now, one thing that's hampering it is that let me take your hand. I'll make it easier for you. If your elbow is up like that, the wrist has to fall down. The elbow is a hinge, you see. If we do want this, the elbow comes down a little bit. You see that? It's either going to be this or it's going to be this. See? So let's see if we can keep this down a little bit and keep the wrist up a little higher. Would you try that again? See, the left hand undermines it, too. Good. Yes. See, what I would do in the beginning in training her is to put my hand there to give her the sensation. She doesn't have the sensation of what it's like to hold the wrist up, you see. So that's a very important thing that I would work on if I were her teacher.
Now, another possibility is that sometimes in order to bring some of the forearm weight behind the fingers, the shoulder will come down. And that is one of the reasons for literally a pain in the neck and the shoulder, when the shoulder comes down like this. And all that fatigue that is created in the upper arm often causes the upper arm to relax. So all the weight falls down on the fingers, and the fingers can't move. So these are some of the possibilities, some of the things that happen when we sit too high. Now, when we sit too low, the elbow is below level, as you see, not where it should be, and the weight ends up falling all the way into here, into the elbow. Now, when that happens, again, the feeling is that of falling off, and the fingers again clench to hold onto the keyboard. So that's one way of creating tension right away. And of course, you don't have the arm and the hand available to support the fingers in key descent. So what often will happen is to bring some hand behind the fingers, the wrist will go up. Now, when the wrist goes up, you're breaking the unity up. Whether it's 2 up or 2 down, it's a break in the unity of the hand and the forearm. So very often the wrist will go up, the elbow is still down, you have a double break here. And too high a wrist creates pain in the wrist also, and irritation all around here. So this is one thing that people sometimes do. Another thing that they will do to get, it's so awkward to be in this position that often the shoulder will go up to bring some of the forearm weight behind the fingers. And this is how people end up with high shoulder. And they're often being told to relax that shoulder. But when it relaxes, it goes back to the other position. All the things that we get, all the pains that we get are symptoms. That's what we have to realize. We can't treat the symptoms. We have to find what is the cause to those symptoms. So very often, again, the shoulder goes up, and that creates pain in the upper arm, and the neck, and the shoulder, and the back muscles. This is an enormously inefficient and incoordinate way to start playing. You're already at a disadvantage when you do that. So whenever there is some kind of a break in the playing apparatus, something falls down, very often this will go up to compensate for it. So that, again, will not be an efficient way to move. Whereas if you're sitting level with the keyboard, again, that allows all the parts to be right there, available, and many people do it. I have to make, again, a point that when I discuss all the different aspects of movement, don't think you're doing it all wrong. Don't start changing, because you may be doing many, many things correctly, and there could be one thing that is wrong that is not enabling other good things to function. It's spoiling them. So it's very important not to do this without asking the teacher and having the teacher observe you playing before you change, because many of those things, I'm describing what's underneath a natural technique. And many of us have many of those aspects worked in, felt, played intuitively. So don't change it without asking somebody. Now, when we go for the positions of the arms, hands, and fingers at the keyboard, we'll start again with the upper arm position. And correct sitting allows for that. It allows for the upper arm to be properly placed by the elbow position. And when it's positioned that way, it can act, it provides a stable fulcrum for the forearm and hands activities. In other words, when we're sitting this way, when we're sitting properly, already the elbow and the upper arm are correctly positioned. Now, we'll find that the upper arm is not capable of these movements, and the upper arm, when it comes to the movements of the upper arm, it's not capable of this movement either in speed. The upper arm is moved by a slow and a sluggish muscle, and you can try it yourself to move very quickly from the upper arm, and you'll see it's not very fast. Why don't you try? Those of you who've never tried, who've never tested this part of the body, try to move quickly, and you'll see that it's not very quick. If you test the finger movement, you see the fingers move much quicker. So how efficient is it to move quickly with a slow muscle? The forearm, on the other hand, is capable of tremendous speed with moving this way and moving that way. It's a combination of those two that provides us with tremendous speed across the keyboard. So it's capable of moving when it initiates motion. Clearly, the upper arm is moving, but the difference is that it's being moved. That if I think of starting from here, it will move too much. And when it moves too much, the fingers stop moving. Whenever part of the apparatus does too much, other parts stop moving or stop working. So if there's too much arm, the fingers don't move. If there's too much finger movement or the isolation of the finger, the arm doesn't move. So it's again all of those things working together, so that if I initiate it from here, I don't even feel this just moves along in very small amounts. There's no sense of that. And of course the elbow, also if the upper arm is in the right place, the elbow is in the right place. And you see that I'm bent at an angle. A little bit, people ask often, what's the distance from the keyboard? It's a little bit in front of the torso. And we basically keep it that way. As we move up and down the keyboard, you see the body moves a little bit with us. As we move in front of the body, we move a little bit back so it can bring it this way. The only time where we don't have that angle is when we play the two extreme of the keyboard this way, and the body moves just a little bit forward to accommodate that, and the arms are straight. But otherwise, as we move, we basically, most of the time, keep this angle. And the elbow, again, when the forearm is moving, it's moving the elbow and the upper arm, and the elbow cannot be in one fixed position. The elbow has to be in whatever position that allows for this unity to be maintained and to avoid all kinds of twisting movements. So as the forearm moves, it moves, the elbow moves right behind it, and the upper arm is being moved along. Also initiating, I should say, movement from the upper arm is responsible for many injuries that we encounter. So it's not giving you simply principles and ideas that, you know, we have so many choices. Those things are the cause of many of the problems that you come here with. Now, what about the hand positions? You know, when we stand, the hand is at our side, tilted toward the fifth side. When we go to the keyboard, clearly we have to turn to be straight over the keys, and sometimes people don't turn enough to be straight over the fingers, especially in the left hand. So it ends up tilted this way. This is, by the way, one of the reasons that the fourth and the fifth finger are weak, feel weak sometimes, because when we are that turn, they don't get the support of the hand and the forearm. So we have tilted motions, which I will discuss tomorrow, but they start from a straight position. And we often use the fourth finger as a model because that finger always feels so tilted and so weak. So when we get the fourth finger to feel straight, not tilted to the right or to the left, we get a sense of what it's like to be straight, and that's the feeling that we should have on each finger. It's a beginning position to get a sense of straightness and support and being centered on each finger. So even if some motions are a little bit tilted, they start from that kind of a solid, centered feeling on each finger. Now, the muscular state of the fingers and hands as they rest on the keys, ready to play, determines in great part whether the technique will function in a coordinate way. Often students are taught to fixate, to tighten, to prepare, and mold the fingers and hands into a particular position to start playing. To fixate or mold is nothing more than forms of tension, however much the amount. Even a little bit would be wrong. Fixating is usually achieved by the use of contrary muscles, such as flexing and extending at the same time, which creates what I told you, those dual muscular pulls, which cause tension that often we're told to stretch. You know, we're using the abductors, which are forms of extensors, and then we're told to flex, to do it this way, and you're already starting with this kind of a very, very tight position. This produces tensions even before one begins to move. How can you do this and then be told to move quickly and freely and get color? To move the fingers in any direction, particularly in speed, the muscles must be totally free to act. The muscular contractions used to fixate the fingers and hand are the same muscles that move them. When muscles are programmed with antagonistic physical goals such as fixate and move, or tense and move, the technique is severely hindered. The slightest tension will limit motion. And it's the same if you talk about if you fixated your body or you fixated your legs in order to move, how far could you go? It would be this way, walking this way. So that when we move, we never think of fixating. We're not relaxed either because there are muscles that are going to be working, you know, to move us. But when we move properly and freely and there is no tension, one muscle is active and the opposing muscle has to be passive. And the only way that we can cue those muscles to act properly is not by saying, you act and you relax. It's not possible. They move involuntarily, but by moving in a way that will bring in the correct muscles and will avoid creating those dual tensions. Now, when we talk about the positions and movement of fingers, I mentioned before something about when we're curling the fingers, and I'll make a distinction between curling, which is negative, and curving, which is just the normal curve of the fingers when the hand is at your side and you put it on the keyboard. This is the normal curve. That's correct. When I talk about curling, I'm talking about doing this, pulling in this phalange here at the nail joint so that this is sticking out practically. And this is, I would say, the basic position that we are taught all over the world, to curl the fingers this way. Now again, when we're curling the fingers this way, I would like you to do it with me. At least those of you who have not been here before, because again, don't accept anything as a fact unless you've tried it. Curl your fingers this way, and then try to move the hand up and down very fast. And then let the fingers fall just in a natural curve, and you see immediately that one is very inhibited and one is very free, right there. And then if you curled your fingers again, and try to move your fingers very quickly, very hard, very restricted. But if you let your fingers just fall again in a natural curve and move your fingers, very easy. So you have to take those facts, physiological facts, and say one way is easier and freer than the other. Therefore, that's what I would like to choose, because I have to do such delicate activities when I play very, very quickly, and I try to get textures and tones at the instrument, that if I'm starting already from this position with that kind of tension, it's next to impossible. So that we know that we don't want to curl again and activate that long flexor that pulls tightly over the wrist, that the moment we let the fingers fall this way, they are moved by the short flexors. They don't cross over the wrist, and it's very free. And this will be a coordinate way to move when we move just in one piece from the knuckle this way. It's just the freest way to do it. There's a couple of other ways in which finger movements are taught. One is this one, the straightening motion from the knuckles that people are often, what is it called? I can't think. The thrusting motion. The thrusting motion, I don't know if many people are taught. Usually when you're taught to do it, you feel the fingers feel all tied up. Very hard to move in speed. But what it is, where it's taught, is usually to lift the finger very curled and then do this. Does that look familiar to anybody? We've seen that this way, this kind of a motion, thrusting motion. Now when you do that, when the fingers are extending this way, you're using the extensors. When we play down finally into the key, we're using flexors. So we're using two opposing muscles at the same time. So it's a very tense, incoordinate way to use the fingers, this kind of a thrusting motion. We have the clinging motion that I just described, and the only other possibility is really allowing the fingers to drop down in one piece from the knuckle in the natural curve, and that's the freest way to do it. One of the main reasons, I should say, for curling the fingers is to avoid or prevent or cure the broken nail joint, especially with kids who come with the break here. So the teachers tell them to do that in order to prevent that kind of a break. But the fingers should never go to that extreme. They should be with a natural curve. And I would say that this joint here is relatively flat. You have to teach people to go down into the keyboard without this either bulging out or breaking in. And that's exactly where it should be, right there. Okay. It's not out and it's not in.
A great deal of the training of the round fingers starts very early in the training of children, when the teachers are concerned with the broken nail joint, the weak little nail joint at the very end when they go to the piano and the nail joint falls in. Perhaps you can see it easy if I do it with the left hand. That show a little better. Now, if you see it that way. Now, it is assumed that that is because the finger is weak, that the joint is weak, and by going in the opposite direction, by grabbing and pushing that last joint out, the nail joint out, they'll strengthen it. What they're doing now is creating the long flexor problem, which is much more serious than the broken nail joint problem. But anyway, how does one solve it? The truth of the matter is that it is not a matter of the weakness of that joint. It's a matter of the inexperience of the child who's never been told to keep his last joint in one piece. In other words, to keep this joint and this joint in one piece. I found that just telling children to hold that last joint perfectly straight, and they did it. That it wasn't supposed to fall in, that they didn't have to make it round to overcome it. that it's simply a matter of a lack of experience. And when the child was taught, no, that if they did this, I said, no, it has to be straight. They just straightened it out. And before you know it, they were playing with a perfectly nice, straight nail joint, and that's the way it's supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a rounded nail joint, nor a falling-in nail joint. Although I will say that the people who come in who are injured and with fingers that are clenched, many for years, have come in from the very round finger training, whereas I have not seen injuries of any severity with people who came in after many years playing with the broken nail joint.
Now, I'm talking about the fact that the fingers should fall in this position. But if we started analyzing where different joints should be, when I talked about fulcrums, you'll see that there's some positions that where we're told to keep the joints in a certain position that would not allow the fingers to fall this way. But before I analyze those knuckle positions, I would like to remind you again that movement is fastest in the middle range, near the middle range of motion, and also that the best positioning is one which allows the moving parts to function at their best advantage. In other words, we have to be in certain positions where movement would be very free and very easy. Now, if the knuckles are held up, which is a very, somehow it's always assumed that unless we go to certain extremes, that the body will not be, the playing apparatus will not be strong enough. So very often it is thought that the knuckles have to be really high to create a very strong bridge. And we're told to hold them up. It straightens immediately the fingers. You see, so the fingers really cannot be. Now, I would like you to hold this up like this and try to move the fingers down. The moment you move, when you come from high knuckles and you move the fingers down, very quickly they reach the extreme range of their motions. And we want positions where limb parts will not move at the extreme range. So here is a position where the moment I move down a little bit, flex a little bit, I'm already at the extreme range. And that creates a pull on the muscles here. It often causes pain in the hand, even extending into the forearm. Now, if you tried to open your fingers in this position, you can hardly open them. So how efficient is that? And if you try to go into the blocky area, that will be the lecture tomorrow? No. Third lecture will be about moving into the blocky area and out. When the knuckles are high, it's very hard to fit the black keys between the fingers. So it's inefficient on so many grounds. It also keeps the hand up and preventing it from supporting the finger when we play the finger. The finger plays down and the hand is holding up. So again, we have pulse. And you'll see that only when we're unified and we move together at the same time in the same direction do we have the freedom and speed of motion. Holding the knuckles up will not be a coordinate way to play the fingers. Now, if we drop the knuckles all the way down, we're breaking a fulcrum. And this is, by the way, again, if you have a break here, very often you'll get backaches. Because when you're falling off like this, it will feel like you're falling off the piano. And the back muscles, again, will come in to help, and very quickly they'll spasm, as with the broken wrist, which I'll discuss in a minute. So the knuckles cannot go this way, you know, and be able to allow the fingers to move freely. So again, if you put the hand at your side and put it on the keyboard, you'll see the knuckles have to be where they are. The only important thing is that there is a knuckle there for the finger to move from. It doesn't have to be any higher than that. And also, if you turn your hand, you'll see that when the knuckles are pulling up, there's like a tent inside. Everything feels pulled this way, that when the knuckles are at the right height and you turn, you'll see that it's flat. And it allows the hand to support each finger when the finger goes down, rather than pulling away from it. So it has to be, it's a little bit higher. The main knuckle is a little bit higher than the middle knuckle. That's about where it has to be. And that's where it allows, again, the fingers, hand, and arm to feel balanced, resting down this way. If we talk about the wrist height, which I already talked a little bit when I discussed the height of the chair, that if it's held too up, when we go to play the hand, the slightest movement of the hand down already brings it to the extreme range of motion and creates pulls up here and can result in pain in the wrist and all around it. It breaks the unity also. If the wrist breaks, which is, when I talk about that, I always feel I'm stepping into a minefield, because this is still the way that it's taught universally, to relax the wrist. And as we say, our philosophy that we should learn to move in a way where there is nothing to relax from. And relaxation often makes the problem much worse rather than ease it. So that when we do this, again, we're breaking the unity here. The weight of the arm, again, falls into here. It's the main reason for pain in the wrist for carpal tunnel syndrome. The fingers have to curl to hold on to the key, and so on and so forth.
Now, I'd like you to take this section again. I want to get over here. Watch your hand. The important thing is to benefit from what happens, because you're very musical. You're doing some beautiful playing, but your hands are not letting you. Take it again from here. Yeah, I'll tell you what I'd like you to do. Starting right out. The first thing I want you to do is give me a very big sound on the top note. Forget about the other notes. All right, now bring it out that way. Now, right. Now play that way. Let's hear only that sound mostly. Right. That's it. Keep doing that. Right. That's it. And that's it. Much better. Now get the line. Give me the line. Yes. Now one of the things that's bothering you too, and I warn you that your fourth finger is eventually going to remain like this, is that your fourth finger is very clenched. There's no reason for that. Get your wrist higher in your chords so that, see, when your wrist is low, this is what happens to the finger. This is very common. You see pianists do this. When the wrist is high, you have a stance for the fourth finger. So you have a lot of little awkwardnesses in there that are really giving you a hard time. So let me see, get a little higher wrist there. Let me see, that's better. Right, much better. Stay as high as you can. That's it. Much better. Yeah, now I don't want you to miss the line. Every word you're playing, I want to hear the line. Bring it out. See that fourth finger jumping? It spasms because your wrist is too low. Let me see you play that chord again. High wrist, now play it. Go ahead, play the chord. Right. Now you see where your fourth finger is? The minute you brought it down, your fourth finger came in like this.
At the basic level of the wrist, just the basic level, has to be where the hand and the forearm feel connected, feel unified. That's where it has to be. Not higher and not lower. It's like a bridge to keep the two together. Now, it's not a fixed position. It has to be flexible, because when we shape, which is again a movement I'll talk about in the 5th lecture, when the forearm moves up and down, higher and lower to accommodate the different finger length, it's a unifying motion that puts everything together. When the forearm moves to do that, it moves the wrist with it in very small mid-range movements. In other words, what has been picked up was the wrist motion, and that's what's been done. A lot of motion up and down in the wrist, and the wrist can't take all this motion. So it gets injured when we do that. But when the forearm initiates the motion, it moves the wrist in such small amount that it's still at a place where it can act as a strong fulcrum for the hand actions. So it moves very little, but it does move. It is not fixed. Also, when we play chords and octaves, and the hand, if you open your hand very freely, you'll see that the wrist goes up a little bit, because the main fulcrum for the finger movements gets flattened, can no longer act as a main fulcrum, and this becomes the main fulcrum. So you'll notice that in octave playing, the wrist is higher, and it is correct.
Now let's go to the beginning of the piece. Do you have any other questions technically that you'd like to ask, go over with me?
I still have trouble balancing.
Talk a little louder.
I have trouble balancing.
What does that mean?
So I won't be able to put complete weight into my thing.
You have trouble getting the power, you're saying.
Yes.
So you use the word balance, you're making a diagnosis. You don't know if that's the reason. Do you understand? It may have nothing to do with balance.
Right.
You're saying you can't get power.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
Now, let's see. One of the reasons you couldn't get power because before you ever got into the chord, you're pulling away. You never finish it. Let me see you really come down. Come down with your arm. Finish it. All right, now if you drop your wrist, you're dropping your fulcrum, you'll have no power. Come down with the wrist high. Atta girl. Better?
Okay.
Keep your wrist high, you need to get the power. Your fingers are stretched out, you lose the knuckle fulcrum, you've got to have a fulcrum somewhere. Now let me see, play it from the forearm. Atta girl. There. See?
Yeah.
Now you'll get power. So it's not a question of balance. Feel different?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, any place else?
Also that when we trill with the thumb and another finger, whether it's 1-3 or 1-2, doesn't matter, that the wrist is a little bit lower to accommodate the thumb, which is a shorter finger, but it's not a broken fulcrum. Just at the place where it feels comfortable. We never play, by the way, below the nail, because we play the thumb generally, plays the different parts depending on what it is that we're doing, but it never goes below this nail line. When we play below it, it's already, the wrist is too low. So that's important to keep in mind. You know, I just wanted to clarify something when I talked about the elbow movement, that it always has to move behind the fingers and the forearm to keep them unified and to avoid twisting motions. But you'll see that the elbow, when we play scale passages, you know how I'm moving, and the elbow has to be moving with me this way. But when we play sometimes chords and intervals, as we move up the keyboard, you see the elbow doesn't have to move as far over. One has to always be flexible with the rules, that sometimes if we don't have to move it so far this way, it will be more efficient. It's easier, you know, to be this way. So in certain situations, we'll see that the elbow is a little bit closer to our body. It's this way, moves this way. So we can be at an angle with the instrument. We can just never be at an angle with our own body, because that's what twisting motions are. But as the elbow moves, I cannot give you an always position. It has to always move with the forearm. If the parts that are capable, the limb parts that are capable of the greatest speed and efficiency are the ones that initiate movement, the other parts that are less efficient will just move in the right amount, and they don't become a burden on the playing. So the elbow sometimes will move this way, and sometimes it will be a little bit more to our side, and the arm can move that way, generally in certain chords and intervals. Now, when it comes to, I wanted to discuss the thumb, because it's a separate subject. The thumb should never be curled this way or bent out that way. Either way, I can't even do it when it just bends out this way. It's an outside curl. Often causes to pain in the thumb itself. It extends into the wrist, into the forearm. When we move the other fingers, it's the flexor muscles that are involved in dropping our fingers. When the thumb, when the thumb flexes, it moves under the hand. That's the flexing action of the thumb. When it plays down, it extends. It uses an abductor, which is a kind of an extensor. And if you want to see the difference, if you take your second finger and you move up and down, that's using the flexor. When you move sideways, that's using the abductor. See, it's a slow muscle. So this is the muscle that moves the thumb. So it's an inferior muscle in terms of speed, that when we move it by itself, isolated, we're using that abductor, and we can't go very fast, and it can injure us also. It can cause pain. So if piano technique was really a question of just moving your fingers, just a finger technique, there would be no solution. It would just have to move by itself and get tired and have pain. But if we talk of instrumental technique in general as unifying the finger, hand, and the forearm, we have forearm motion that come up and down and sideways, that can go behind the thumb and make it feel as good and as fast as the other fingers. It removes the burden of that muscle having to act by itself. So the moment you unify the finger with the arm, there is no problem as far as the thumb is concerned. That also means that the whole training of the thumb under, when we play scales, when we're told to put the thumb right under, can be very injurious. Because when you put the thumb under like this, you're flexing. When you play down, you are extending, so you're creating dual muscular pulls that are incredible as you go fast in scales and arpeggios. Anytime you do this. Also, if you put your thumb under and move your fingers, I want you to try that. Try that, and then let the thumb out and move your fingers and see how much freer that is. So I will discuss forearm motions that allow us, makes it possible for the thumb to get to its destination without having to do this, without having to flex and extend. And of course, in speed, all those antagonistic movements multiply. There's less time for one muscle to let go of its pull and for the next one to take over. So we're constantly flexing and extending and ruining our hands. Another symptom of isolated thumb usage is referred to as the snapping thumb. The sensation is usually described as a snapping motion rather than the smooth, controlled free drop the other fingers experience. When the thumb moves down without hand and arm support using only its abductor, it is a forced, spasmodic motion that ejects the other fingers upward. This kind of a thing. And sometimes in scale, when people, it sounds accented, and you see suddenly the fingers are all shooting up. When the thumb affects the other fingers this way, it is because their extensors are also sympathetically activated. As we go down this way, it throws the other fingers up and pulling the fingers upward. This delays the downward finger movements, undermining speed and power. So if you have any questions that you want to ask me now, why don't you ask me? Yeah?
It's something about, we never play the thumb below the nail line. Could you describe that?
Here, below this.
So that never touches the keyboard.
Right. We don't, in other words, when we play scales, just basic scale finger passages, I would say that it's playing about here, about the middle of where the nail, just about there. But if we play distances, or if we play octaves, and the wrist we're higher, I'm playing here, not here. You see where the nail ends? Okay, not behind that. It goes up here. It plays at different parts when we do different skills, but it's never behind. Blythe.
Well, the camera is focused close to your thumb. Would you go over the motion where your fingers shoot out and you
You're talking about the snapping motion? Yeah, to see how it works when we snap. This is when it does it by itself. It's this kind of an isolated, in other words, the hand and the forearm remain up, in fact, and the thumb is going down by itself. This is a motion of the thumb playing isolated thumb movement. When it isolates like this, it tends to throw the other fingers up. That's what it is. It's this kind of a thing. Can you see it? Any other questions? Yes?
Do you ever use the thumb on 2 keys?
Excuse me?
Do you ever use the thumb on 2 keys?
I guess so. You know, when you have, if you have things like that, yeah. No, it depends what kind of an interval you're playing. Or if you play, no, I'm still playing here.
Okay.
I'm still playing here. I'm playing where I was before and a little bit higher. If I just do the thumb by itself. It'll be a little bit harder. I'm playing there. You're right. There I would be here. I wouldn't use this motion too often, but there I'm covering more of the key, yes, then I'm here and I'm here. Okay, now I will talk about one more thing today, and that is the instrument itself, what we need to know about what it can do and what it cannot do. Now, the piano is a machine that is governed by its own laws. It is a speed tool that requires perfect timing and aiming, much the same as a tennis racket or golf club. A violation of its laws acts as a destructive feedback to the pianist's hands. We have all seen pianists who seem to be fighting their instruments, and we can also sense it in the tortured playing that results. It is a losing battle that usually ends in the destruction of the pianist's hands. This machine can survive. Now, what do we need to know to be more efficient and to be better operators of the instrument? And the first thing is that when we put a key down, if you looked inside the keyboard, you will see that by the time you got to the bottom of the key, the hammer has already hit the string and fallen back. And if you put the key down very slowly, you'll feel a little bit of a bump. And it's at that point of the bump that the hammer hits the string and falls back. We call it the point of sound. Now, it's very important to realize, though, that we don't stop at that point of sound, because we'll be hovering. That even though you know that this is where it's at, this is where you aim your power, that there is a follow-through as with any movement. You know, you can time a ball coming at you, but you don't stop there. You aim your greatest force at it, and then there's a follow-through. What is important about it is that we still land on the bottom of the key, but that there is no pushing and forcing, you know, all of this at the bottom of the key, which creates tremendous amount of tension. That's where it's very important to realize that we aim to the point of sound 3/8 of an inch about from the surface, and on the bottom there is no more work, there's no more effort.
What do you feel? As soon as you're uncomfortable, tell me. As soon as you're uncomfortable, tell me.
Well, it's just cramming feeling.
You feel crammed?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, the first thing I want you to do is not play down to the bottom. When you're playing loud, just squeezing on the bottom. Just aim for the point of sound. When you come to the bottom, just feel very easy and rested. Try that again with that if you mind. Stop pushing so hard. Right. Notes. Is that what you're talking about? You're not on the keys. Remember one thing, you cannot miss a note if you're on it. No way. Which means that when you play, your timing of your staccato is not correct. You're beginning to aim from the ear some way, and you're lucky if you get to the note. Now, any time that you go to a key, there's a movement to a key, and then you have to touch the key, and you got to put it down. So you have three things happening. You go to a key, you touch the key, you put it down. The timing of that will make it correct or not. You begin to play before you touch the key. You're gearing from here. You take your life in your hands. When it comes down, it should be passive. The active moment of playing should be when you make contact with the instrument. Mm-hmm. But you're not doing that. You're playing someplace from here. Mm-hmm. Now, I want you to get that no matter how high you come up, you don't play until you feel the key. I have in my notes, in the magazine section of the New York Times, Rubinstein's tuner wrote an article in which he said that in watching Rubinstein play octaves and chords, it always looks like he's playing from here. But if you watch him very closely for 1 split second, he touches the note, then he's off again. No pianist hits from above. It looks like that. You need to get started to get the weight in motion. But the active time, the moment of truth, you know, you don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes. Remember that from history books? Yeah. Well, now you don't play until you feel the whites of the ivories under your fingers.
Now, what keeps the sound, the strings vibrating, is that holding the key up keeps the damper up. So the strings can continue vibrating, and this is one basis for legato playing. And that if I remove my fingers, of course, sound goes, but if I put the key down and put the pedal down, keeps all the dampers up, and that's another basis for legato. And the reason it's very important to keep that in mind, that the two are interchangeable, is that when it's been universally thought that to create a legato effect, we always have to have a finger legato. When we can do it, it is fine, but there are places with great stretches where hanging on and playing legato to get a legato effect can cripple us. Also, when the hand is so stretched, we can't bring the weight of the arm behind each finger to give us the textures and the colors that we want. So when we cannot reach, we have the pedal at our disposal. And we have toned, correct tone production. We have shaping, so we can create a much better legato effect than the hanging on. So it's very important to realize when we can connect, we do. When we cannot, the other means to do it.
Very lovely. Before we get into the interpretive work, there are a few questions here about the technique. When you do, let's go to just start backwards from the coda. I feel that you're stretching, aren't you? Do you feel stretched?
Yeah.
Yes. Let me see you do that again. You're going to hurt yourself unless you change that. All right, let's go right here. Well, wait, show me just exactly when you begin to feel it. You want to start it from the beginning and stop as soon as you feel stretched. You feel immediately. Yeah, you turn. You feel right here from the very beginning?
Yeah.
Let me see you do it. Okay. All right, now. First of all, one of the reasons, I want you to just play the chord by itself. Are you stretched? No. Then why should you feel stretched?
Well, it's...
Now, you see, you haven't really yet. In other words, you're stretched because you're playing this and playing this and trying to connect it at the same time. The chord by itself is very simple to play. Now, what you do, get off this note immediately. And all you have to do is connect one note. Let me see you do that. Yeah, that's right. Feel stretched now?
Yeah.
Right. Finish. There you are. Feel stretched?
No.
At all? Now make sure that you feel this. First play the chord very strong, right? And just don't even connect that finger. There's no way that you can feel whether it's legato or staccato at that speed. There's no need to play a true legato here. It will sound legato no matter what you do. First of all, you're pedaling it. See, again, we have that problem over and over again. And that, you know, what is so strange is that a student will play a Mozart or a Beethoven run, and that pedal is down, and it's a complete smear. They don't feel a guilty conscience at all. But if they have to play a chord to a single note, and they'll destroy their hands by connecting it, there they insist that the pedal is not important, you see. There they'll do it with their hands, where they actually don't have to connect at all, and there's where the pedal has to be used. There is no reason for a true legato here at all. It'll sound just as legato. So I want you to play the chord and go right to the next and see if you feel stretched at all. You don't really play the chord. You see, what you do is you're going there. There's no real sound on the chord. Play the chord beautifully first, and then go to the single note. Right. That's what counts. I hear this. When you play, I hear this. Da-da. Let me hear the chord first. Atta girl. And then, that's right. Get into the chord. Yes, it's a rhythm, right? Da-da-dum. Get into the second chord. Da-dum, dee-dum, dee-dum. Now that doesn't sound any less connected, does it? Makes no difference. The ear will never pick it up, not in a million years. You see, what we haven't done is really face the reality. We grow up with a lot of pedantic notions. You have to connect and you have to do this and that without realizing, do we really have to? Does it sound the same? Does it sound different? You have now the luxury of having tape recorders. Tape it and listen to yourself and see if you have to kid yourself that way. The important thing that you want to do is not to win an Olympic competition that you can stretch and that you have a hand as big as the abominable snowman. This is not what you're trying to prove. You're trying to give an illusion of a beautiful series of notes strung together, having an illusion of some kind that you're trying to project. Instead of that, you're worried about some teacher having said, that is a legato, therefore I must play legato. This is something that all of you have to begin to think in those terms. First of all, never to play in a way that's going to hurt yourself, because that might be the last time you'll ever play again. So what's the purpose of it all? So you must never, the first rule is never to hurt yourself. And the second rule is never to compromise musically, because it's never necessary. There's always a way to do exactly what you want to do without hurting yourself.
In terms of the key being a speed tool, and this you can teach children from day one, and they'll begin to sense what the instrument is capable of doing. If you put the key down very slowly, there is no sound. And if you put it down a little bit faster, there is sound. And as you go faster and faster, there is more and more sound. Now, as you go beyond a certain speed of the key, the tone begins to be very harsh. Also, when we hit the key very, very fast, the key hits us back with equal force. Every action has a reaction equal and opposite to itself. When it does that, we end up with calluses and bleeding tips. That's what happened from hitting a surface so hard. So there must be other ways, which I'll discuss in the next few days, of how to get power without going beyond a certain key speed. Also, another interesting phenomena that takes place when we go very fast into the key, because it's been playing fast, speed-wise, has been equated with playing very fast fingers into the key, that when we hit, again, the key very fast, and it hits us back with equal force, it rebounds us a little bit. The finger, instead of landing straight on the key, goes 2 or 3 times up. It bounces a little bit. Now, that's not what we feel. We don't feel we're bouncing. It also, by the way, destroys legato between the fingers. But what we feel is that we're going faster and faster, and we're getting slower and slower. So speed, the answer to speed is not by going very fast into the keys.
Where is this? Right, that bothers you. What bothers you? Just those notes in here?
It sounds terrible. Sounds like mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, now the only thing that's wrong with it is that each finger's playing too fast. In as fast as you play, there's time to go down to the key and make it gorgeous. Let me see you go down slower. That's it. There's another one. That's it. You never just wipe it. You have to take the time to put a key down. And the time that it takes to put a key down as fast as possible and as slow as possible has nothing to do with tempo.
Right.
Understand? So therefore, you can take the luxury. If you want to get a beautiful sound, go slower. As fast as you play, go as slow as possible into those keys. Do that again. There. You have music. No, you're still too fast. Slow up every finger. Every note. That's right. Better?
Yeah.
That's all you need to do is slow up your fingers there. And you have it. Practice it slow at home and then go as fast as you can, feeling as slow. Playing should never feel fast, Jack. Your playing feels too fast and hurried.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the control it should have for that reason. If you feel fast, you know that you're playing incorrectly. And that's something very important to remember. No matter how fast you play, if it feels fast, you're not playing correctly. Because controlled playing feels slow. It does. Did you have a lecture on that? And then you heard her explain that it never should feel fast, and that's true. The moment it feels fast, you're going into that key too quickly for the tempo.
That if we know that when we go slow into the key, we get a softer sound. That's all we have to know. Now, if the fingers move by themselves, they're moved by very light muscles that don't have very much power, so it would be difficult to overcome surface resistance. The key is heaviest at the surface. If the fingers move by themselves, it would be hard to overcome that so-called heaviness, and the finger would have to do it by going faster into the key to overcome the surface resistance, and then we get a bigger sound. So pianists end up by tensing the fingers, afraid to move them, and holding up when it comes to soft playing. Sometimes the problems, I will hear someone play, and I see a lot of the playing is very coordinated, except in the soft playing. That's when everything begins to feel like that, hovering up. Now, if we were to know that going down into the key slower would give us the piano sound, and also that we always have to move together, that we can't keep the hand and forearm up and the finger to be going by itself, into the key, or either thrusting motion or either just using the flexors and just moving in an isolated way. If we know that, then when the fingers rest closer to the keys, they bring the weight of the hand and the forearm behind them. Now these limb parts are heavier, so they can provide us with the weight to overcome surface resistance very easily, so that the finger can control the hammer at the point of sound and put it down slow. In other words, if you just think of going down slow and everything is moving ever so slightly with you, it's not a wrist break, it's just the whole playing mechanism is moving together. It's very easy to get a soft sound. And the fact is that we can play soft and fast. So that is another proof that that slowing down the key does not mean slowing down the tempo, because we can slow down the key for soft playing and still go fast. So there is another answer to that. So it's very important to know that in terms of soft playing. And again, that when we are moving, when we are slowing down the key, that we still have to feel solid on the key bottom. There should never be again a feeling of holding up. Should be able to get the colors and the effects that we want without feeling all that tension.
Could you demonstrate slow and fast and soft playing in more time?
Yeah. That when you go slow into the key again, that you can go very fast and still go slowly. Still go. In order to produce the soft playing, I have to go slow into the key, and yet I can move quickly. Now, when you want to get power, you see, once you have the forearm behind the fingers, this is where we get power from. You see, the fingers are incapable unless they go again very fast into the key, and there are technical problems that happen as a result, and also the sound is very harsh. And you have the bouncing, it slows you down in the end. But the arm is heavier and can give you a lot of power into the key where the fingers don't have to do any more than they do when they play softly. In other words, it's not the job of the fingers to do everything. That's why we injure them. That's why we injure ourselves. The pains that we get here usually and here come from isolating the fingers. A lot of it comes from just isolating the fingers and forcing them this way. So that the power, you can get tremendous power, but just letting the arm fall freely. But again, I will constantly tell you, it's not a relaxation. A relaxation is going beyond the resting, the lack of tension point. Relaxation is an activity. Relaxation is when I got there, I continued dropping, and all the fulcrums begin to fall. Now, what happens when we relax, and I have to say something about it because it's used so much as a tool, that when we relax both muscles. As I told you, when we move freely, one muscle is active and the other one is passive. When we relax both. So if I sit like this, I feel rested. And to the brain, it translates, I'm relaxed, but I'm not relaxed. I don't feel any tension. But if I were to relax and to begin to sag, and then if I had to start moving, it would take tremendous amount of effort to get the muscles to act again, to create movement. And this is why when people are very relaxed, they have tremendous amount of tension as well. And because we've not been told how to diagnose problems, it's not a diagnostic approach usually, we are a diagnostic approach. Then people who come with tension from relaxation are told to relax further. So you can imagine what's happening. So tension can come from tension, from overusing the muscles, and it can come from tremendous relaxation, where it takes a tremendous effort to get to move again. It takes too much effort. And it ends up as a tension. So again, if we know what each limb part can do well, and we let it do its part, and everything is combined to get orchestrated together, then no part is working or doing too much or working beyond its capability. And this is really what you'll see when I talk the next few days. If one part is missing, it will not be working very well. It may be working better, but not very well. Now again, when we work with people, sometimes you add one thing. I'll show you the efficient arm motions tomorrow. You do one thing and other things begin to happen by themselves. It encourages and stimulates the mechanism to work in a more natural, efficient way, so you don't have to teach everything. But you find the whole thing is based on such subtle things that sometimes you can say one thing and that puts everything together. And if that one thing is missing, it's working, less efficiently. So the way we work is with a lot, how does it feel? Yes?
Yes, could you go over the concept of point of sound again, please?
When you put sound, the hammer hits the string. The point that sound is produced is at that bump. Most good pianos, all good pianos I should say, have that bump. You see, when you put the key down slowly, you'll feel a bump. That's the point at which sound is produced. That's the point of sound. And if you know that, you'll try to aim your power and your energy to that point. You can't stop on it, but you just know that it's rather close to the surface. And when you land on the bottom and stand solidly on the bottom of the key, you don't continue pushing. You have wood there. It won't help if you keep pushing. But it has tremendous ramifications on the technique as a whole when you do press and push. So it has to be an easy, just resting down, but no more effort. No activity on the key bottom. Like standing. When you stand, you don't press, you don't push, you don't feel up. You feel that you're resting down. Right? Same thing.
And yet you still feel the key bed as you play like you have played.
Absolutely. It has to feel solid. In other words, it can feel like you're tiptoeing somewhere. So it feels, when you go to the key bed, you see if you come down with the forearm, coming down, it feels very solid on the bottom if no fulcrums are breaking. The finger is supported. It's very easy to put it as slow as you want, to the point of no sound. You should be able to produce whatever it is that you want, but you're always on the bottom of the key. You're just not pressing there, nor are you hovering up. You know, you can be on the bottom of the key holding on with your finger, and the arm can still be hovering. And people will give symptoms. In other words, it can look right and still be wrong. Yeah. I think slower. I'm assuming my arm is always, do I think slower? Do I think the arm behind it? In order to slow down the key properly, I have to slow down. The arm has to help me slow down the key. That's really what's slowing down the key, because it's a heavier part, as I said. So that part allows me to slow the key down without all the tension. You know, when people play and the arm is not behind, even if it's soft, sometimes it comes out, sometimes it doesn't come out, sometimes the tone is too thin. You know, there is no predictability as to what's coming out. No, I use this to be able to slow it down to the sound that I want. Oh, yes, of course. You know, again, slower, I always say, is not very slow. It's not, I mean, too slow, there is no sound. It's slower than when you're doing it when it's too fast. How's that? One last question. Yes?
Yes, I'm thinking about your trying to voice a chord.
The what?
You're trying to voice a chord where you have to bring one note out and it's louder than the other parts of the chord that are different parts.
It's really, you're ahead of me, but you know, you have to, again, I didn't talk about tone production. I don't know if I should start now, but tone production has to do with going down to the key at a certain speed and allowing the arm to fall freely behind it. This is how you can get. So even when I put the chord down, I don't fall over. I will talk about that. Because tilting, when I talk about tilting, it will weaken the fingers because the arm is really not balanced behind them. But there is a way to come down and to drop a little bit, to free a little bit more arm weight behind the finger that you want to bring out. And that's what does it. There's no effort in the finger. I feel nothing in the finger. If you want the thumb, you can bring the thumb. If you wanted the middle note, it doesn't matter. Once the arm is connected to your finger, you can tell it whatever it is. Whatever it is that you want, you know where to bring it from. Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow. And now I need the room for teaching, so if you can go to your activities, whoever's supposed to stay here.
You have something I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to do some passage work for me. I just want to see on the right side certain things, okay? I'd like very much for you to play this passage for me, okay?
Yeah.
No, this one right here, the right. Have you ever seen yourself on video? Have you ever seen yourself play?
Once. I did a couple
Very interesting to watch your hands. The fingering that you're using here is crippling. It's very dangerous what you're doing because you're taking a finger which gives you this kind of a spread. Don't you feel it?
Yeah.
You're not comfortable here, are you?
Well, it's a little stretch, yeah.
A little stretch. Well, you know, with these little stretches to 4 hours, 5 practicing a day, that's when pianists come in with their fingers in serious trouble. Let me show you how to finger. That would make it very easy. All right. Here, you take this. Now, you have this. Let me see you do that. Right, and there are no stretches on. You have to look at the music from the viewpoint of grouping. Now, what we did was group. You didn't think of it in terms of breaking it up so that you make your jumps where you have the biggest stretches. What you did was make your jumps where your fingers were close together and you had them stretched out and work them in the wrong groupings. Do you understand? So you always look at the music when you feel stretched. I can assure you, and I want to say this to the audience to understand this. I have yet to find a piece where the stretches could not be removed. Now that should tell you something. I have yet to find a piece. Now I've covered in 45 years of teaching pretty much most of the important repertoire, including contemporary music. And it can always be grouped in a way where you do not have to stretch and hurt yourself. That's collision course, this kind of stretching. You just a little stretch, but you know, you keep doing that for hours a day, and before you know it, those tendons and those muscles will spasm. They're going to resist that pulling because especially the way you play. Now, you play very much curled with your fingers down. Now, when you're stretching your fingers, you're using an extensor, which is on top of the finger. And when you play down, you're using a flexor. So you're making claws. I'd like you to see what your hands look like when you play these things. You're this way. Now,
Sort of like that.
I have to discuss your technique with you before we can do anything else, because I'm assuming that you came here because you really want an evaluation. And you're such a gifted woman. You play so remarkably beautifully well that for me to discuss the fine points of interpretation kind of be silly. I have a very different approach. So what? You impress your audience, they love it. So who cares that I have a different approach? You understand? That's not the important thing here. You know, that's not really important. So, but the important thing is that I see serious problems. I see that if you continue playing this way, you tremendous chance on having some kind of injury and crippling. I don't know what you're feeling now, but you must be having pain in some parts of your body. You've got to. There's no way that you can play this way and not. I'd like you to tell me where they are.
Well, shoulder pain.
Yes, that's right. You see, first of all, you have to recognize one thing, that all your efforts are wasted efforts, and that they're always on the up. The piano is underneath you. And all your most active movements are you pulling up with your fingers. That shouldn't be happening at all. The most active playing should be downward. So you have a dual muscular pull, and you see the flexors and extensors are all situated in the one finger. You're pulling them in two directions. So that eventually what happens, I'm on the left side, I constantly see that fourth finger being pulled under like this. One day that's going to stay that way. what you have to be retrained is that your fingers have to lift together and come down together. They don't. When you play one finger, the others are pulling under like this, pulling up. You're pulling against yourself all the time. Also, some of the reason for this is that you're moving from your upper arm. Now, this is a slow muscle. There is no way that you can move from the upper arm. Now, that doesn't mean we play like this. It means that the other movements carry the arm along. It's not initiated from there. It's a tremendous difference is moving and being moved. Understand? They're two different things. In other words, if the audience would just get the feeling, if you just would, Edna will cover this, but just to get the feeling of what I'm talking about, and that is that if you would just take your right hand and open it up to its maximum, and I want you to feel the stretch. All right? It doesn't feel very good. Now take your left hand and open it out without using the right hand muscles at all. Not the same, is it? You'll be able to go much greater distance if you just do it with the other hand and you're not using the muscles of this hand, but an outside agency is opening up the hand. Now that's the same way that the upper arm is used, that the motion of the forearm carries the upper arm along so that its own muscles are not being used. Now you have a tremendous amount of that movement. Now what I'd like you to do with the piece now, I want you, now that's one place, I want you to try it again with my fingering, see how easily it'll go.
All right.
Try that. Feel the difference? Right? Now just a simple little arpeggio. And the other way you took this 1, 3, 4, which is a very, feel that? All stretched out. All right. Now, I would like you to go to any other place that's uncomfortable.
Well, you know, some of these,
Yes.
when you reach for these chords and things,
Yes.
like that,
Yes,
you know,
that's right.
even that,
Yes,
that's
now,
hard. Of course, you know,
let me ask you something. I'm so glad that you pointed to that. I want to know why you feel that you have to hold down every note. Are you pedaling?
Right. Yep.
Why do you have to hold down? Right.
This one is, you know,
Right.
this one's
Now,
hard to
again, you're pedaling. Yes, you can hold the top. Now, let me just tell you something. Any time that you have a series of chords and you want it to sound legato, for example, if you hold on to one note, it will sound legato.
Yeah.
It is never necessary to hold on to any more than one note. And if you're pedaling at the same time, you don't have to hold on to anything because you're only repeating the same thing. After all, the pedaling, all we have to, when you're holding down a key, the damper is up so the key can vibrate, so the string can vibrate. But when you put your feet down, all the dampers are up. You're even getting more vibrations. You're getting more of a legato. Wherever it's possible to use the pedal, sometimes you can't, so we make other kinds of adjustments. But here, the pedal is indicated. There was no reason why you did that with a big stretch and you're hanging on to every note. That's the road to physical suicide. You do one note at a time and you get off. There, no problem, is it?
Right, yeah.
That's right. Now play it, the passage, and see how it feels. Right. Better? Any problem now? Okay. Any place else?
I don't know, other than just, you know, generally it's the kind of piece that
Yeah.
it makes you sort of tense, and it's such a dramatic kind of piece.
So you feel
sort of,
tensions in the
well, you
piece.
just feel like, you know, in order to bring it
Yeah,
off.
well, you see, now, again, you
kind of
talked about
thing.
something very important. One of the byproducts of a tense technique and an approach which is not based on any kind of a science is that it is assumed that to play with intensity, you have to have your body feel tense. And the opposite is true. What happens is that if you're tense, the only thing that happens is that the playing is labored. What you think comes out as intensity is labored. Because you have to be free to make it intense. Making it intense means that you have the proper power and the proper speed and the proper timing. Not that you feel tense. You think it's intense because you're feeling it in your own body. That doesn't mean it's coming out that way. What should come out as intensity has to do with your understanding of the structure of the music, not because you are tied up in knots. That is a complete way of projecting into yourself what should be projecting outward. I would like you to go to some of the places where you know that your shoulder gets involved. Would you please?
Well, maybe even up in this
Good.
part here. Okay.
All right, let me see you do that. Do you feel it already?
Yeah, sort of
Did you feel it in your shoulder?
a little bit. I was
Yes.
trying to keep
Now,
it out. But
I want you to do this again. When you come at the end, don't do this movement.
Okay.
Just stay there.
Okay.
Let me see you do that. No. I'll show you something. Now, you have a way of going here which is incorrect. You see, you're moving from here.
Okay.
Now, instead of that, move over this. Let me show you this. This way. You see what happened to your elbow?
Right.
There you are. Now you're moving a huge mass. Like I said yesterday, you went to open a door, but you opened the wall.
Right.
See? This way. Let me see you do that again. There. Does it bother you now? No. That's why you're getting shoulder pain.
Right.
There. Now, I would never restrict your elbow to the degree that I am. It would be free to move.
Yeah.
But it's taking the brunt of all the playing when the rotational movement is so easy. Just rolling over does it, and you're doing this all the time. And that's giving you that.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have pains in your fingers or in your hand?
Tiny bit underneath.
You had to have it in the wrist.
Just like tweezing out.
It's all.
Yeah.
She's got it in the wrist underneath, and it had to be. It had to be, because all that pulling up, the extensors are pulling, the flexors are pushing when it gets down. There's such a battle for your fingers to move. Nadine, you're such a gifted woman. You've got to work it out. Absolutely. I'll tell you what, if you don't, someday I'll come back and haunt you. I promise. All right. Let's see where else you're getting it. No, you're still moving from here. That's it. Now, don't hold on to all those. You're stretching. Not necessary. Right. Right. How is it? Gone? No. Don't use those fingers.
I'll be able to do that.
That's it. All right, you'll get used to that. How's the shoulder?
Here. It's fine. I mean, I try to keep it.
That's right.
I think the elbow is the big.
Yeah, that's exactly. You're playing. You see, when you move the elbow, you're moving your upper arm. Now, I don't play like, as I said, don't have the idea you're going to play like this now. That'll give you other pain. You understand? It's just that you don't. You have to think where to move from, and if that happens, it'll happen to the right degree. But you're not moving from the right place. The forearm is doing nothing, and this is dragging your arm and your hand and your fingers and everything around. Instead of this, it'll move to some. My elbow is not. Yeah. In other words, it should be done with rotational movement. Right. There it is. There it is. Look at how small that movement is. But it does more than that. You have all these big movements. You can't imagine what more you could do in the speed and in the power if you could just sit there and do it like you're hardly moving. All right, where else? I would like to know where else you have problems.
Well, gosh. I don't know. I mean, there's same sort of things happen there. Well, I don't know, the octaves we can...
Let's do the octaves.
Okay.
Good. Now, you did something very dangerous. One of the reasons for pains in the wrist is you broke a fulcrum.
Yep, that's...
You must not go down, no matter what you do, especially when you, look, when you do an octave, you're stretching your fingers out, right? You see what happens when you stretch? You lose a knuckle fulcrum.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have a knuckle fulcrum, you don't have a wrist fulcrum, everything is flopped down from the whole back and shoulder. That's giving you the backache.
Yeah.
Do those octaves again and make sure that your wrist is always high. Don't come down at all. Stay up. Stay up. Atta girl. How do you feel? Don't come down. Don't come down to the end.
Okay.
You think you're making it intense
right,
and
yeah.
feeling. And you know when you come down, after sound has been produced, then she's dropping down to get a beautiful sound when nothing is happening. That is such a waste. You play and then you come down. You tell me what's being achieved. Okay, that's different. Any place else?
This seems to be all right, I guess. I could try.
Bother you those
Not really.
no?
It doesn't really bother.
All right, then I think that
Just the overall.
hope there's any point. As I say, I have another approach musically. I don't know what I want to even go into it with you, because it's very lovely. What you're doing is fine.
Yeah, I think the
And
technique is
so I think that's it, Nadine. I think you know what has to be done.
Okay.
All right?
All right.
Thank you. And of course, I feel that teaching is also knowing how to tell the pianist exactly how to do what you want him to do. I think the most frustrating thing in the world is have a young artist come in and to tell him what you want and his hands can't do it. And he feels inadequate and miserable, and this is pretty much what I find with the young people who come. They are terribly intimidated by their past training, because if they can't do something, it's a stigma. And I think that the stigma is, the finger has to be pointed instead of outward toward the student, toward the teacher. It is the teacher's job to find a way to get the student to do. We're talking about dedicated, earnest, and gifted people. There's no reason why any of them should not be able to do exactly what they want to do.
You feel you can teach anybody to play the piano at a virtuoso level?
I think I can teach anybody to play well. The levels would be very different with different personalities for many reasons. Well, that has to do with the amount of concentration, the amount of inner sensitivity. We all have different levels of sensitivity and concentration. The amount of intellect, we have different intellects. But physically, every child, every person can learn to play physically well. The student knows when something is right or wrong. I can't tell him. I can't tell him, say, you're playing wrong. He has to tell me, I don't feel good. And then I know what's happening. I can make a diagnosis listening, watching, and mostly listening to what the student has to say. We have to listen with a third ear, because I found that the student is never wrong about his own body and his own feelings.